From the point where we have left, we already started with the Commonwealth literature does not exist, and we have seen that Salman Rushdie was attending a conference in Sweden where it was designated for Commonwealth writers. We also saw that Rushdie was not very happy with the use of the word Commonwealth literature, that is specifying the literature written by writers from the Commonwealth nations as Commonwealth literature, because there were certain limitations to the use of this expression, and he referred to it as one of the oddest of beasts. That is, he has referred to it the oddest of beasts. He calls it the most oddest of beasts. Why odd? Because it is a strange thing that has been created by the leader thinkers. He says, I thought I'd better go along to take a closer look at it. What is that it? This is a seminar, this is a conference that he is referring to here. The conference was beautifully organized, packed with erudite, learned and sophisticated persons capable of discoursing at length about the new spirit of experiment in English language writing in the Philippines. Also, I was able to meet writers from all over the world, or rather the Commonwealth. It was such a seductive environment that it almost persuaded me that the subject under discussion actually existed and was not simply a fiction. That is, the environment was so very cordial and it was so very comfortable that writers who came to this conference already began to think that it was something that was true to its name, but it was not actually so, as he was soon going to realize. And a fiction of a unique type at that, in that it has been created solely by critics and academics who have then proceeded to believe in it wholeheartedly. But the doubts did, that is, the doubts persisted. Although he was hypnotized by the environment of the place, environment of the conference, and the writers who participated in this conference, thinking that we are all one, there was something that poked him, something that brought in him questions of doubt and suspicion to the very concept of Commonwealth literature. In spite of all temptations to succumb, persists, that is, although he tried his hardest in order to ignore the doubts that still persisted, they were there. See, I have underlined here, I have highlighted this section, which is very important. You may underline it in your copies as well, in your textbooks. Many of the delegates I found were willing freely to admit that the term Commonwealth literature was a bad one. South Africa and Pakistan, for instance, are not members of the Commonwealth. Now, we already know that Commonwealth of Nations comprise of 54 countries. But out of these 54 countries, only 53 countries, the literature of the 53 countries, were called the Commonwealth literature, because England, in spite of being a member to this Commonwealth of Nations, the literature of England did not form part of what is called the Commonwealth literature. So this was really questionable. Why? Because Commonwealth of Nations is something that was formed by the fact that the countries under this umbrella were actually countries which were colonized by the British imperialistic power, but at the same time the British their literature did not form part of the Commonwealth literature. So this was something questionable. Again, South Africa and Pakistan, for instance, are not members of the Commonwealth, but their authors apparently belong to its literature. South Africa and Pakistan, because it was formed much later, and their literature, they did not form part of the Commonwealth literature, they were not members of the Commonwealth of Nations. But at the same time, the writers writing from these areas, they also formed writers of Commonwealth literature. On the other hand, England, which as far as I am aware has not been expelled from the Commonwealth quite yet, has been excluded from its literary manifestation. See, the demarcation, the separation, the segregation, the division is very, very clearly apparent over here. So, who are the Commonwealth writers? The Commonwealth writers are actually writers who belong to the Commonwealth of Nations, the 53 countries which have been colonies of England. England, in spite of becoming one of the members of the Commonwealth, its literary manifestation is not a part of it. At the same time, South Africa and Pakistan, they are not members of the Commonwealth, but their literature is included in Commonwealth. So, how do you categorize it? How do you compartmentalize? How do you separate it? What are the parameters? What are the elements by which you will try to understand what actually Commonwealth literature is? Can you define Commonwealth literature? Nah, it is not possible, because there are no clear demarcations as to what is actually Commonwealth literature. Who are the people who form part of the Commonwealth literature? Again, see, for obvious reasons, it would never do to include English literature, the great sacred thing itself, with this bunch of upstarts. What are the bunch of upstarts, and why does he call them a bunch of upstarts? Because these are countries which have newly acquired the English language, and England is one country which has been speaking English from its very inception. The other countries, they have picked up the language, whereas England was something that was born with a language, so therefore Rushdie uses there is a sarcastic tone to this expression, the great sacred thing itself, and the bunch of upstarts. What are the bunch of upstarts? Mane ki hotat kore gojiye jeta ote, that is a upstart. And the other countries, the colonies, they have adopted the English language and they have started speaking English language. We cannot say that English is our mother tongue, can we? English was never a part of our culture. It actually came to us as a legacy of the English, and now we have adopted this language as our own. There is no difference between English and any other language, like say Marathi, Nepali, Bengali. English is like any other language. We have adopted this language very, very smoothly, but we cannot forget that English was never our language. We have adopted this language as part of our historical past, isn't it? And we cannot forget it. Historical past, we cannot forget our historical past, that India was at one time one of the conquered nations of England. At the Commonwealth Literature Conference, I talked with and listened to the Australian poet Randolph Stowe, the West Indian Wilson Harris, Ngugi wa Thiong'o from Kenya, Anita Desai from India, and the Canadian novelist Aretha Van Hark. So this is Randolph Stowe, and this is Wilson Harris, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Anita Desai, and this Aretha Van Hark. I became quite sure that our differences were so much more significant than our similarities that it was impossible to say what Commonwealth literature, the idea which had after all made possible our assembly, might conceivably mean. Van Hark spoke eloquently about the problem of drawing imaginative maps of the great emptiness of Canada. Wilson Harris soared into great flights of metaphysical lyricism and high abstraction. Anita Desai spoke in whispers, her novel The Novel of Sensibility, and I wondered what on earth she could be held to have in common with a committed Marxist Ngugi, an overtly political writer who expressed his rejection of the English language by reading his own work in Swahili. So Rushdie had his own doubts about the whole conception of the seminar itself on Commonwealth literature, because the Commonwealth writers participated, they wrote, they expressed their views, but it could have happened in any other English studies conference. What was so special about being Commonwealth to it? What was different in it? Actually, there was nothing different. What Randolph Stowe said or what Wilson Harris said, these are things that bring out the culture and ethnicity of their own countries, just as Anita Desai's novels, which are novels of sensibility, also bring out to a certain extent the Indian culture and thought, isn't it? So they are bringing along with them their culture, their ethnicity, their tradition. Each of these writers have brought with them their culture, their tradition, but this could have happened in any other English studies seminar. So what was so special about its being Commonwealth. Now, Rushdie has spoken here about Ngozi Othongo, who was a more revolutionary writer among them, and he decided to speak in Swahili. Swahili is their own tongue, and instead of English, and there was a translator. So none of the participants who participated in the conference could follow the language. But in spite of that, this was a mode of protest against the fact that English is not my mother tongue, it is my adopted language. What is my mother tongue? Swahili is my mother tongue. So I am going to speak in Swahili, and this is my way of protest. That is, I am trying to forget the past, the painful past that has happened to us. So this is a way of trying to reclaim back its own heritage. So Ngozi Othongo's presentation was one of the modes of this revolutionary revolutionary way of challenging its own historical past. Okay, with the Swedish version read by its translator, leaving the rest of us completely bemused. So the others were bemused, that is, they were not able, they were completely incapable of understanding what he was saying actually. Now obviously this great diversity would be entirely natural in a general literature conference, but this was a particular school of literature. So there is the thing, the question marks come there. So this is only natural in any other English studies conference, in any conference where people were speaking in English. So these could have been the subjects of any conference with participants who could speak in English. But what was so different about being Commonwealth? What were they actually discussing? Was it anything very very specific to being Commonwealth? Commonwealth হওয়ার জন্য কি তারা আলাদাভাবে কিছু ডিসকাস করছিল? না, তারা কিন্তু এখানে আলাদাভাবে কিছুই ডিসকাস করছিল না। তারা কি করছিল? They were discussing their tradition, they were discussing their culture, they were discussing their customs in a way that was reaching out to the world. So that reaching out to the world could have been out of the box as well. So a box had been created, a compartment had been created. ট্রেনে যেমন হয় লেডিস কম্পার্টমেন্ট, সব মহিলারা একটা কম্পার্টমেন্টে উঠেছে। So this is a kind of a box. So the Commonwealth writers, they are belonging to Commonwealth literature, so they have to speak from that. So that means in the first section Rushdie had already differentiated between what was English studies and what is Commonwealth literature, and now he is bringing into question that why Commonwealth literature, what is so different about it? How do you separate it? How do you conjecture its form? Is it possible to conjecture its form? Now previously he called it the oddest of beasts, isn't it? Oddest, odd, খুব odd, মানে যেটা সাধারণ নয়, খুব odd, দেখতেই odd লাগছে। তো oddest of beasts, মাথাটা কোথা থেকে এলো? ফিলিপাইন্স থেকে। পাটা কোথা থেকে এলো? ক্যানাডা থেকে। নাইজেরিয়া থেকে একটা হাত এসেছে, ইন্ডিয়া থেকে মুখটা এসেছে। So it's a combination of parts. So you have the head from Philippines, you have the leg from Nigeria, you have the hand from India, you have the head from Canada. So these are the various things, and how odd would it be? That creature would have been the oddest of all things, isn't it? So Commonwealth literature, the box of Commonwealth literature is one of that type. So this was a particular school of literature, and I was trying to work out what that school was supposed to be. So how does he define it? Let's see. Underline the whole section. So I've highlighted the entire section. Please mark it and read it properly when you read the text again. The nearest I could get to a definition sounded distinctly patronizing. Commonwealth literature, it appears, is that body of writing created, I think, in the English language by persons who are not themselves white Britons or Irish or citizens of the United States of America. I don't know whether black Americans are citizens of this bizarre Commonwealth or not. Bizarre? Strange. Probably not. It is also uncertain whether citizens of Commonwealth countries writing in languages other than English, Hindi for example, or who switch out of English like Ngozi, are permitted into the club or asked to keep out. By now, Commonwealth literature was sounding very unlikable indeed. So what is the definition he gives? That this is a language, this is a body of writing created by those persons who are not born British or Irish or Americans. only those who can speak English, but they are not British or Irish or Americans. Their literature can be called Commonwealth literature. This is the first definition. And the second way he defines it is saying that if it is so, if the literature written by people belonging to the countries which were actually colonized by the British, those literature from those countries, then how would you include the vernacular language as well, literature written in the vernacular language? For instance, Hindi. If someone is writing in Hindi, he also belongs to the Commonwealth literature, because Hindi literature written in Hindi is also literature of the Commonwealth, isn't it? So in that sense, literature that has been written in Marathi, literature that is written in Bengali or Hindi or any other Indian languages, so to say, or any other language of any other Commonwealth nation, that literature should also have been included in Commonwealth literature. But it is not so. Only literature which has been written in English is included in Commonwealth literature, and that literature should have been written by someone who is not a British or an Irish or an American. So there is a very clear cut demarcation here. Now we don't forget it time and again that literature which has been written by the English do not belong to this group. Only literature which has been written by the non-English in the English language is included in the Commonwealth literature. So there is a very, very clear cut demarcation stating that what they are writing, that is the people belonging to the English style, the literature that has been written out of the Commonwealth literature is much superior, or is positioned in a much superior place than the Commonwealth literature. So Commonwealth literature is something that is not up to the mark. We talked in our previous lecture of periphery and margin. We already noted that Rushdie was talking about the Commonwealth literature as something that belonged to the peripheries, and it was not the center. It was in the margins. It was not the center. What was the center? The English studies was the center. Now what he is talking to us here is this: in defining Commonwealth literature more appropriately and in more details, he is also giving us a notion of the fact that how language plays its own game. Language plays its own politics. In raising one language, you are actually dominating another language by giving more priority to the English that is spoken by the British or the Irish or the Americans. We are actually suppressing, we are actually inferiorizing the English that is written by the writers belonging to the Commonwealth nations. And some writers have demanded a kind of revolution. They have demanded a change, like Ngugi wa Thiong'o writing in the Swahili language. So he could have written in English, but he wishes to challenge it. He wished to challenge the very concept of dominion of language. So there was a new domination of language. But we have to adapt the English language, as Rushdie will very soon tell us, but in our own way. So what is suggested more here is this: by positioning, by compartmentalizing it, by putting literature written by writers belonging to Commonwealth nations, with the exception of England, into a box, Commonwealth literature is being positioned in a much inferior, positioned much below English literature or English studies proper. And the effect of creating such a ghetto. What does the word ghetto mean? See, interestingly, ghetto means the part of a town where many people of the same race or religion live in poor countries. Ghetto actually is the term that we use with this bosti. So the bosti is a word which we don't use in a very enlightened manner. So there is no light revolving. There is nothing enlightening in the expression use of the word bosti. So if you are using someone is coming from a bosti, then there is a derogatory, there is a pejorative sense associated with it, isn't it? So if Rushdie says that Commonwealth writers, the literature of the Commonwealth writers is like literature of a ghetto. So it's a poor country. As if the literature that is given by them is very poor in quality and output. Simply, the literature of the English language is to wait and the effect of creating such a ghetto is to change the meaning of the far broader term English literature, which I had always taken to mean simply the literature of the English language, into something far narrower, something topographical, nationalistic, possibly even racially segregationist. So what did the word mean? So the literature does not mean English literature. It did not mean literature that has been written in English language. There was another politics played along with it. What was that? It was topographical in nature, it was nationalistic in nature, and at the same time it was racially segregationist. It was racially dividing. You are dividing it, you are making a difference between the whites and the non-whites. You are making a difference between the quality of English spoken by people belonging to the Commonwealth nations and the people who do not belong to the Commonwealth nations, and at the same time you are making a difference between the western half of the world and the eastern half of the world. So there is a clear cut demarcations that seek to derogate the very idea of Commonwealth literature, and this is what Rushdie is questioning. Rushdie is raising his voice against. It occurred to me as I surveyed this model that the category is a chimera. What is it? It is a chimera, and in very precise terms. The word has of course come to mean an unreal, monstrous creature of the imagination. So he calls the Commonwealth literature something of a chimera. And what is it? Chimera was a Greek mythological figure, and this was a fire breathing female monster with a lion's head, the goat's body, and the tail of a serpent. So this is the monstrous creature. So what is it? Is it complete? No. It has the head of a lion, it has the body of a goat, it has the tail of a serpent. Neither is complete, and the formation is monstrous, isn't it? So that is what Commonwealth literature actually is. But you will recall that the classical chimera was a monster of a rather special type. It had the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and a serpent's tail. See? This is to say, it could exist only in dreams. It was something that could exist only in imagination, because it is not possible to recreate it in the real world, being composed of elements which could not possibly be joined together to the real world. The dangers of unleashing such a phantom into the groves of literature are, it seems to me, manifold. As I mentioned, that there is effect of creating a ghetto, and that in turn does lead to a ghetto mentality among some of its occupants. That is, people began to feel, okay, so I belong to this ghetto, I am into this box, and they are giving me a prize for being the best writer. They are giving me a prize for being the best composer, for the best literary output, and that is what? That is within that box. You are not included into the world of literature. What is been classified is the group, in a group. So actually this chimera here is used to refer to the concept that Commonwealth literature actually aimed for, but which turned out to be illusionary, and which was impossible to achieve. What had been thought for Commonwealth literature was actually submerged in doubts, and it had its own confusions and raised further confusions. Questions were galore. Questions were innumerable, and it was not the ghetto mentality persisted among the many writers, but Rushdie was not one among them. So, and what does he say further? Let's see. Also, the creation of a false category can and does lead to excessively narrow and sometimes misleading readings of some of the artists it is held to include. And again, the existence or putative existence of the beast distracts attention from what is actually worth looking at, what is actually going on. I thought it might be worth spending a few minutes reflecting further on these dangers. I'll begin from an obvious starting place. What does he say? That see, if we, in some of the writers there is a ghetto mentality. That is, we belong to the Commonwealth writer, we are supposed to write about it. We cannot cross this line. Or if there is something, there are certain associations which are made directly with a certain group. And here there have been certain associations, there have been certain things that have been connected with Commonwealth literature. And people do not move want to move out of it, move beyond the line. If you are if কেউ তোমাকে বলছে তুমি খুব ভালো, তুমি খুব ভালো, তুমি খুব ভালো, হঠাৎ করে তুমি একটা বাজে কাজ করলে, তো তখন তোমার সেটার সাথে ম্যাচ করলো না, তো সেখানে তোমার নিজেরও মনে হবে যে তুমি বোধহয় লাইনটা ক্রস করে, আমরা একটা কথা বলি না, লাইনটা ক্রস করে যাওয়া। সো দিস ইজ এক্স্যাক্টলি দ্য থিং Rushdie is talking about. So line, crossing the line may also mean in a positive sense. So you are thinking beyond the box, you are thinking out of the box. So here the writers are not able to think out of the box. Why? Because they have been, pushed into a box and the lid has been closed, and they have told us that whatever you write and whatever you do it amongst yourself. So you are not part of the larger whole thing, and you are the one, you have to be in the peripheries, whereas our literature is in the center. So not all, see, this essay by Rushdie is something that he has questioned, and he has raised his voice because he found in it a term, a grouping that he was not comfortable with. He did not find it pleasant to deal with such an expression like Commonwealth literature. However, not all writers will think alike, not all people think alike, and there may be many writers, and with due respect to them, who might think differently. So we as students of literature, we are not here to question ourselves. We are reading an essay written by Rushdie, and we are trying to interpret the thought processes that might have pushed him into thinking what he has written. So this is what we are interpreting here. We are not being judgmental. Remember that we are not going to judge, because there may be many reputed writers, many known writers, who might have thought otherwise, and who might have proudly belong to this group. I thought it might be worth spending a few minutes reflecting further on these dangers. I will begin from an obvious starting place. English is by now the world language. It achieved this status partly as a result of the physical colonization of a quarter of the globe by the British, and it remains ambiguous. Ambiguous meaning having more than one possible meaning, but central to the affairs of just about all the countries to whom it was given, along with mission schools, trunk roads, and the rules of cricket as a gift of the British colonizers. Okay, so what he says here, that we have received the English language as a part of our legacy, and at the same time English colonizers, our British colonizers, have also given to us many other things, like they have given us the mission schools, they have given us the trunk roads, and they have also given us cricket, which we all enjoy, don't we? But its present day preeminence is not solely, perhaps not even primarily, the result of the British legacy. But what he says that, see, we have taken the English language from the British, but it does not mean that it is because of the British legacy that English has achieved its present day position. The present day acceptability of English as a global language is not because of the British colonizers or of the fact that the British had colonized half of the world. It is not because of this. There are other reasons why English has gained so much popularity, why English has become the world language. It is also the effect of the primacy of the United States of America in the affairs of the world, truly said, because America is one of the first world countries, and as a superpower, there is a widespread influence of America throughout the world, and it is natural that the people of America speak English. So English has also grown to be an important language of the world. This second impetus towards English could be termed as a kind of linguistic neocolonialism, or just plain pragmatism on the part of many of the world's governments and educationists, according to your point of view. So what he says, that so there has been a kind of a linguistic neocolonialism. Linguistic, language এর দিক থেকে new colonialism, মানে নতুন করে আবার colonialism হচ্ছে, and that is a linguistic one. Why? Because the first point already, it follows from the first point itself that the United States of America is a superpower. So they speak English. So it is only natural that in order to contact them, in order to continue administrative and other necessary functionalities of the different state governments of the different countries, it is necessary that English should be adapted as a world language. So this need for wider exploration, this need for governmental and administrative comforts, administrative functionalities, it was only natural that people should adapt English as their own language. And the third thing he says it is plain pragmatism. Pragmatism মানে কি হয়? Practical. So practical বুদ্ধি দিয়ে কি হবে, যে বেশি যার ভাষাটা শিখে আমাদের কাজে দেবে সেই ভাষাটা আমরা শিখবো। আমরা এখন কি তামিল গিয়ে শিখবো? হ্যাঁ, না, শিখবো না। যদি আমি তামিলনাড়ুতে গিয়ে থাকতে শুরু করি, আমি তামিল শিখবো। কেন? কেন কি তখন আমি তামিল না শিখলে আমি ওখানে কাজ করতে পারবো না। Exactly the same thing is playing in world politics. So there is a language politics that is going on in the entire world. Why? Because their language is the most powerful language. English has become the global language. So if you are trying to communicate with someone who is in Canada, someone in New Zealand, you do not know their language. If you are communicating with someone in Nigeria and you do not know their language, you don't feel uncomfortable. Why? Because you can speak in English and English will be adapted and English will be spoken to them. So you need not worry. So you can go around the world and you can speak English. Okay, we'll stop here and we'll continue in our next lecture.